dear UPSC and NPSC aspirants. Welcome to the Hindu daily editorial and current affairs analysis. Today we will look at the news for July the 16th, 2026. So today's agenda is going to range from environment and ecology all the way to history and culture. So in the front page we have four important news. One is Iran threatens to halt all regional oil exports and NDA pushes for a two-third majority and IED blast. DGP urges the public to share information and then BSF to fence the marshy Sundarbans. So coming to environment and ecology, the second Indian Wildlife Ecology Conference was held at Ashoka University, Sonipat, Haryana on 10th to 12th of July. Uh, the gathering of the researchers from the universities, government agencies, NGOs and the field stations across the 3 days, 197 talks have happened and talks and participants returned to one question: how can ecologists anticipate ecological change? The climate change, habitat fragmentation, invasive alien species, and rapid development are reshaping the ecosystem faster than the scholars can document them. So the ecologists now want to know not only how biodiversity has changed, but how is it likely to change next. The IWEC was conceived by late biologist Ajit Kumar as a national platform for India's wildlife ecologists, and the inaugural 2024 edition established the community. It paid plenaries. Its paid plenaries showed the discipline expanding across biological scales from deep evolutionary history to daily decisions animals make to survive, while the panels examined how AI, genomics, and environmental DNA are transforming research. So the work uh, spanned Jahnavi Joshi used the phylogenetics to ask whether parts of the Western Ghats act as evolutionary cradles or they act as the museums of ecology. And Mahesh Sankaran of NCBS projected the climate stress on the mountain grasslands. And Ashwin Vishwanathan showed eBird India citizen science reconstructing the rusty-tailed flycatcher's migration, and Maria Thakur studied spiny-tailed lizards thermoregulation. Yet the panels warned that technology cannot replace the fieldwork unless we have the field logic. We won't analyze our data well. And the free-ranging uh, dog debate tied the ecology to public health, waste management, and urban governance. And uh, Nindita Badra of ISER Kolkata said that we want smart cities but can't manage our garbage. As Indian ecology reaches towards a prediction across the biological scales, disciplines, and the science policy divide, that ambition still depends on staying close to the ground, the long term field monitoring, strong local institutions, and integrating the biodiversity with livelihoods and climate resilience beyond the protected area boundaries. Second, let us look at the China's Great Green Wall. For half a century, workers across northern China have fought desertification through three North Protective Forest Program. One is the Great Green Wall, launched in 1978, planting the straw checkerboard uh, and irrigation-fed saplings. The area of diversified land peaked in 2000 and has since fallen by over 1,000 square kilometers every year. Then desertified land. So the drought, overgrazing, and the farming had stripped the vegetation, degraded soil, and left the land vulnerable to wind and the sandstorms. Reversing this desertification protects the farmlands, water, air across the regions, covering nearly half of China. Desertification is long-term degradation of the land into desert-like conditions. The checkerboard lattice had become the campaign's iconic image. Forests planted now cover a cumulative of 500,000 square kilometers. The effort combined frontline sand control labor with top level planning and heavy state investment. Over 300 million rural laborers, mostly paid part time, have taken part. The Chinese Academy of Science data, the desertification land has shrunk 10% since the year 2000. Severely and extremely desertified land is down over 40%. Forest cover in the program area rose from 5% to 14% compared to 1990 and 1978 with 2022 data. The UN Convention on Combating Desertification's chief scientist Baron Joseph Orr argues the real significance is scale plus the long-term political commitment with reference to reversing desertification, which is possible when it becomes part of a development strategy. But scientists caution the gains are fragile in nature. Preserving Preserving them will need decades of continued effort, and recent rainfall has helped. The achievement is due to people's hard work and a bit of luck with climate. The model sustained state investment, frontline labor, and favorable climate is a reference point under the UNCCD for countries, including India, which are pursuing land degradation neutrality. The task now is to hold the gains rather than declare victory. Then, Delhi had notified its electric vehicles policy 2026 on 30th of June, setting aggressive deadlines. Only EV three-wheelers may be registered from the 1st of January 2027 and only EV two-wheelers from 1st of January 2028. Like commercial vehicles, face the 2027 cutoff too. The transport is the single largest source of Delhi's winter particulate pollution, 23% as per CAQM source apportionment study, and also feeds the secondary pollution. Two-wheelers alone are 67% of the city's fleet, so the policy calls for electrification, critical for meaningful reduction in the vehicular emissions. The two segments are at very different stages. The three-wheelers are only 4% of Delhi's vehicles, but 43.16% are already electric and 65.7% of the 12,809 new three-wheelers registered up to early July 2026 were EVs. The two-wheelers lagged badly. Of the 1.05 crore on the roads, only 1.7% are EVs and just 41,263 there, which is 7.25% of the 5.68 lakh new two-wheelers in 2025 were electric. Then, meeting the January 2028 two-wheeler target would require roughly a 12 to 13-fold, which is around 1300% jump in the EV two-wheelers sales in a single year, and Delhi is not switching noticeably faster than the country as a whole. The challenge is compounded because two-wheeler registrations are themselves rising sharply, and a strict end-of-life policy would force replacement of the 15-year-old petrol and 10-year-old diesel two-wheelers with EVs. Support infrastructure is thin and uneven. Delhi has only 771 charging points, heavily concentrated in southern region, with the Delhi Transco tasked to expand it. The way forward is the three-wheelers target looks achievable. The two-wheeler goal needs a rapid charging infrastructure ramp up and phased and predictable scrappage and demand incentives so the transition raises the air quality without disrupting the livelihoods. Next, let us look at the economy. India's June 2026 merchandise trade deficit jumped 430%, but the surge was driven mainly by the imports, especially the crude oil whose value increased by 40% and on compared to the earlier oil price spikes. And gold, which is rising on West Asian uncertainty and doubled May duty. Fertilizer, it had rose by 201% by value as gas supplies were hit and the electronic goods. Meanwhile, a bipartisan US Senate bill proposes 100% tariffs on India and four other Russian oil buyers. The deficit's composition matters more than the size. Most of the jump is crisis-linked imports, while the exports held firm. Merchandise exports grew at 15.5% in June and 16% in the quarter one for the financial year 27, and non-petroleum exports rose by 16.5% in the June and 12.4% in quarter one, showing genuine, not just petroleum-led strength. The bill, initiated by late Senator Lindsey Graham, would impose 100% tariffs on India, China, Slovakia, Hungary, and Azerbaijan for buying Russian gas, buying Russian oil, while exempting 15 European nations that import the Russian gas. If enacted, it would be the first US law explicitly using the tariffs to penalize financing another nation's war. India's electronic imports are rising as assembly grows, and the center removed basic customs duty on the display assemblies, lithium ion cells, and inductor coil parts. The Hindu's reading is that India's trade weaknesses are becoming episodic in nature, tied to the West Asia crisis and monsoon. while its strengths are structural because the exports to every region except West Asia grew in the quarter one, much of the growth in the vol- in volume, not just value. So the service exports, however, lagged by just 2.9% in June and a growth of 6.2% in quarter one. So the Indian National Congress called the tariff threat a humiliation and demanded the government clarify its stand. The chief economic advisor V. Anant Nageswaran cautioned that success in the areas like global capability centers should not be considered an end in itself. Way forward is to localize the electronics input so the supply chains are truly secure, diversify the export destinations to hedge the West Asia risk, and avoid complacency in services while clarifying India's diplomatic response to US tariff threat. Next, the Chinese economy grew 4.3% in the second quarter of 2026, down from 5% in the first quarter. This is the slowest since 2022 and below the government's own lowered annual target of 4.5 to 5%, as per the National Bureau of Statistics of China. The fixed urban investment fell 5.7% and the retail sales was sluggish. Urban unemployment was held at 5%. The slowdown matters for India and other trade partners because China's simultaneously surging exports are widening the trading balances, even as its domestic weakness raises the questions about the global demand. The core drag is the real estate. The property investments fell 18% in the first half because most of the household savings are locked in the property and the bank deposits pay little and the capital controls limit the alternatives. The slumps spillovers are in construction, materials, consumer confidence. These are vast in nature. Offsetting this, the high-tech industries and the exports are booming. Exports grew 17% in H1 and rising for 11 straight quarters to $2.1 trillion, including a surge in the air conditioners export to Europe. The local governments are hit hard as the land sale revenues fall. The CPC's own uh, Communist Party of China's own anti-corruption watchdog flagged one Nanning plot was sold 18 times without changing the hands to inflate the fiscal revenue by 2.83 billion yuan, captivated by quick gains. A Politburo meeting is expected to unveil several measures. Beijing has announced a first of its kind 5-year consumption plan. By 2030, retail sales target 60 trillion yuan, which is a 20% rise, and targets 12 million new urban jobs in 2026, despite AS hit to the hiring. On property, the government walks a tightrope, avoiding systemic risks, while neither bailing out the developers nor abandoning Xi Jinping's 2016 line that houses are for living and not speculation. Way forward is boosting the domestic consumption, minimizing the job losses, reforming the property sector without a bailout are Beijing's priorities. How it manages the export surge will shape the trade frictions with India. Next, the India-UK Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement became operational on 15-16 July 2026. On day one, India exported goods worth 140 million US dollars to UK at zero duty. Alongside it, double contribution convention exempts temporary Indian and the British workers from the host country social security contributions for 60 months. SETA secures the duty-free access for 99% of India's exports, giving the labor-intensive sectors long sought relief, while DCC lowers the cost of deploying the professionals abroad, directly aiding India's services competitiveness and mobility. Normally, a detached foreign worker gets only 12-month UK national insurance exemption. The DCC extends this to 60 months, but it is not retrospective, so it will not cover Indians already working in UK or Britons in India before July 15th. To claim the exemption as a worker must obtain a certificate of coverage from India's Employees Provident Fund organization as proof of India's contributions. And UK-India bilateral trade was $45 billion pounds in 2024, rising to 48 billion pounds by 2026, even before the deal. The textiles are standout gainer. The exporters in Tirupur and Surat had long faced a duty disadvantage against Bangladesh and Cambodia in the UK, which now is going to close. And the Confederation of Indian Industries, Chandrajit Banerjee highlighted enhanced access across IT, financial, professional, education, and healthcare services, plus improved mobility and the DCC. Prime Minister Modi said SETA will boost the farmers, entrepreneurs, and MSMEs and give the sectors strong access to the UK markets. And Maharashtra symbolically flanked off the first consignment. The way forward is to convert the market access into realized exports and meeting the rules of origin, easing the non-tariff barriers, and leveraging the services mobility and the DCC certificate of coverage route to cut the costs for Indian professionals. Next, RBI issued guidance on regulatory expectations for the data governance for the banks and the regulated entities, prescribing a comprehensive data governance framework. Separately, SEBI has released a stricter code of conduct for the board members 2026 that tightens the rules on whether its board members may invest. As the financial sector digitalizes and adopts data-driven models, data has become a critical asset. Weak governance now creates financial, operational, compliance, and reputational risk across the whole banking system. And the public trust also depends on the regulator's own integrity. The Reserve Bank of India's DGF, which is Data Governance Framework, must ensure data quality, accountability, and the security and comply with the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. It has to be proportionate to each RE's size, uh, complexity, business model, and technology, and cover the full data lifecycle, uh, comprising of the structures, the policies, the processes, systems, and the audit. And it is to be reviewed at least annually. SEBI's 2026 code replaces the 2008 code, which had only mandated disclosure of the members and the family's holdings. SEBI's new code classifies investments as permitted, regulated pooled vehicles such as SIPs, SIFs, and units in the InvITs, investment trusts, and the REITs, real estate investment trusts, versus the non-permitted like equity or convertible to equity instruments and derivatives. Crucially, whole-time members will now fall under the insider trading rules as persons with unpublished price-sensitive information. Together, the two moves push the governance discipline both outwards, that is, into the bank's data practices, and inwards into the securities regulator's own boardroom, reflecting a wider shift towards accountability and conflict of interest management in India's financial architecture. The way forward is regulatory entities must build the data governance frameworks spanning the entire data lifecycle and review them annually. The regulators, by tightening their own conduct rules, signal that the governance integrity begins at the top. In the fortnight after Manrega became Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Gramin in force from 1st of July 2026, registered workers fell from 27 crore to 26.33 crore, and a drop of 67.6 lakh or 2.5%, and the active workers fell 26.3 lakh, which is 2.43% drop as per the analysis by LibTech India. The scheme is India's rural safety net and a legal guarantee to work. Even a small statistical dip raises the question of whether genuine workers are being wrongly omitted uh, through the digital compliance filters rather than merely deduplicated. LibTech is a consortium of academics and activists calls for the fourth major fall in the calls this the fourth major fall in the worker numbers to coincide with the digital compliance measure after Aadhaar-based payments, mandatory eKYC, facial recognition attendance, Bihar with 5.98 lakh fall, Uttar Pradesh with 8.06 lakh, and Telangana with 7.2 lakh accounted for most of the removals. The transition guidelines said eKYC verified job cards stay valid and workers should not be denied work for pending eKYC, but there is little clarity on how those unable to complete eKYC or the facial recognition are protected. The Rural Development Ministry disputes the finding. The figure is dynamic because records are continuously verified and updated by the states under the center set standard operating procedures, and no complaints or denied employment were received, and 84,000 new Gramin Rojgar guarantee cards covering 1.91 lakh workers were already issued under the new law. But the deeper problem is transparency. Public data does not reveal why the workers were removed, whether prior notice was given, whether Gram Sabha verification happened, or gender, age, or caste of those affected, so exclusion cannot be distinguished from cleanup. So, way forward is to ensure eKYC and the facial recognition failures do not cause a wrongful omission, with transparent Gram Sabha verification, a clear appeal mechanism, prompt restoration of the genuine workers, and disaggregated public data on removals. Next, uh, GST in the Northeast. So, analysis in the Morung Express finds that Northeast has gained from GST because it is a consumption region, with Northeast GST revenue more than doubling with a compounded growth rate of 27.5% between 2017-18 to 25-26. Yet the stark disparities persist. Separately, Northeastern Council released 58.96 crore for Nagaland in May-June 2026 because goods and service tax is a destination or consumption based tax. So the revenue accrues where the goods are consumed rather than where the goods are produced. That structurally favors the northeastern east's consumer economies over manufacturing states, but the lower industrialization caps how much they actually elect. Assam dominates the region. Over 60% of the Northeast registered taxpayers and 1.06% of India's GST, while Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur each contribute less than 0.1%. Small states post spectacular growth of a low base, Nagaland with 454%, Arunachal with 744%, and Mizoram with 334%, but their combined share stays around 2%, reflecting insufficient industrialization, reduced income levels, geography, and small markets. So the Northeastern Council funds target exactly this connectivity and development gap of the 58.96 crore given by the Northeastern Council. 48.02 crore is under the NESIDS road scheme and the rest under the scheme of Northeastern Council covering the seven road projects including Tizama Chetu Airport Road, Chetu Airport, and a skill development center, Garo Community Center in Dimapur, and 9.60 kilometer Glory Bill Peak Tourist Road in Fate, expected to benefit 28,387 people across 11 villages. The wider lesson is high GST growth rates alongside a tiny absolute share makes a demographic and economic frontier yet to build a substantial revenue base. The way forward is to bridge the gap with focused compliance, sectoral growth, and digital integration. The composition scheme and lower GST for small businesses and the budget hotels, GST relief on the GI tagged farm produce, and AI driven invoice matching to formalize the local economic activity. Next, let us look at the sectors of the economy. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, chaired by the Prime Minister, cleared 1.27 lakh crore for the second edition of the Semiconductor Mission, or Semicon 2.0, and 62,500 crore for the Mobile Phone Manufacturing Scheme. Both schemes aim to localize the manufacturing amid a global memory chip shortage and geopolitical uncertainty, reducing the import dependence, capturing the economic value at home, building the chip supply for AI era devices. Semicon 2.0 expects to attract about 4 lakh crore of investment and yield 2 lakh crores of semiconductor production over the scheme period. It is the first pillar. Its first pillar is chip design, and it uniquely incentivizes even suppliers of the raw materials like minerals and gases. The first edition, with 76,000 crore, has approved 12 projects worth of 1.64 lakh crore, with most investments led by Tata Electronics. The Information and Broadcasting Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw said Semicon 2.0 has six pillars, aims for self-reliance in indigenous chips by the end of this program, and will meet the chip requirement for AI devices. MPMS offers incentives on the eligible sales, uh, plus up to 1.5% to the domestic sourcing of the key components and sub-assemblies, 3% for design and R&D of the product, research and development of the product explicitly to build Indian brands. The cumulative mobile phone production over the scheme is expected at 39 lakh crores with a significant rise in the exports, generating roughly 60,000 direct jobs. The strategic shift is from assembly to value addition, deepening the domestic component ecosystem from minerals to design. So India moves up the electronics value chain and competes on the exports rather than final stage assembly alone. The cabinet approved the National Investment Policy for Urea to set up 89 new gas-based urea plants with a combined capacity of 10 million tons and cleared two Varanasi highway corridors worth 25,400 crore under the hybrid annuity model. India imports 10 million tons of urea a year. The domestic output is about 30 million ton, uh, falls short of the demand of 40 million ton, which is rising 5% annually. So the new capacity is meant to make the country self-reliant in its most widely consumed fertilizer. The highways is the chronic congestion in Varanasi. The NIPU, which is National Investment Policy for Urea 2026, extends the 2012 new investment policy with key revisions, separation of fixed and variable costs for transparency, a viable return on equity band with a floor of 12% and ceiling of 16%, and the mitigation of the foreign exchange risk by converting the fixed costs into the rupee after 4 years. Incentives are uniform across the private, government, and the cooperative projects. The highways are 43.218 kilometer corridor linking NH31 to Varanasi Ring Road at 10,998.32 crore and 46.039 kilometer corridor linking NH19 to the Ganga Ring Road with 14,447.64 crore. The urea revisions are estimated to save over 250 crore per plant versus NIP 2012, making fresh investment viable. Demand is rising with the changing cropping patterns, increasing the sowing area and record production. The highway corridors sit under Varanasi Decongestion Plan and are aligned with the PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan. The NH19 corridor is designed for 80 to 100 kilometers per hour and it will cut the travel time between NH19 and Kashi railway station from 50 minutes to 25 minutes, while the NH31 has another journey from 40 to 20 minutes. Way forward is to close the 10 million ton urea import gap with new gas-based capacity attuned to changing the economy and sequence the Varanasi corridors through Gati Shakti to relieve the congestion and improve the connectivity. The next news is about the semaglutide. The global pharmacy giant Novo Nordisk's semaglutide patent expiring in India in March 2026. More than 40 Indian firms have planned low-cost generics of the diabetes and anti-obesity molecule, which is marketed as Ozempic and Wegovy. But the country's largest generic player, Dr. Reddy's, had suspended the supply of its generic semaglutide after detecting the impurities in the active pharmaceutical ingredients during the production scale-up. So, this patent cliff is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for India, which is the world's largest drug industry by volume and 11th by value. Yet the impurity setback exposes the systemic manufacturing quality chinks precisely as India tries to move up the complex medicines. India supplies about 20% of world's generics by volume, over 50% of Africa's generics needs, and 40% of US generic demand, and 25% of all medicines in United Kingdom. So the quality failure carries a reputational cost far beyond the affected product. Semaglutide is a complex peptide harder to make than the small molecule generics behind India's past patent cliffs. India has around 500 API makers, about 8% of global API industry, and a market worth 1,31,700 crore in 2025. The recurrent quality lapses, such as 66 children deaths in the Gambia from imported cough syrups and contaminated US eye drops, invite intensifying scrutiny from US FDA, EMA, MHRA, and World Health Organization. and could delay India's entry into one of the fastest growing generic segments. Dr. Reddy's expect new injectable batches by late October or early November. The pecuniary loss may be temporary, but the damage to the investor sentiment and the export credibility can persist. The episode marks a transition from competing on the low cost simple molecules to competing on the manufacturing sophistication for complex peptides. India must compete on manufacturing sophistication, process reliability, and regulatory compliance, and treating the regulatory credibility as a strategic asset rather than on patent timing alone, and leveraging 15,000 crore pharma production linked incentive scheme to build the high value capacity. Next, the Ministry of the Heavy Industries invited global bids to set up advanced battery plants totaling to 10 gigawatt hour under the production linked incentive scheme for the advanced chemistries for cell batteries. Separately, the government of India will invest 200 crore in electronic electric vehicle maker Ether Energy through India Japan Fund. The ACC batteries store the electricity from the renewable sources such as the solar and wind for the grid scale use and power the electric vehicles. Localizing their manufacture cuts the dependence on the imported cells and secures both the clean energy and the uh, electric vehicle supply chains. Under the 18,100 crore ECC PLI scheme approved in 2021, 40 gigawatt has already been allocated to the domestic manufacturers against a target of 50 gigawatt hour, and this 10 gigawatt hour is now open to global bids to draw in large international players. The India Japan Fund is a joint investment vehicle backed by the Government of India and the Japan Bank for International Cooperation. In the other round, the founders Tarun Mehta and Swapnil Jain are each investing 20 crore and Hero MotoCorp about 960 crore. All promoter investments are priced at an 85 rupee premium to the SEBI mandated floor, with warrants issued to the HMC and the promoters and equity to IJF. Okay, read together both the most. One is the PLI expansion, and the second one for the PLI expansion for the cells and the strategic state equity in the electric vehicle maker shows the government blending the incentives with the co-investment to build a globally competitive battery and the electric vehicle ecosystem. Way forward is to localize the cell manufacturing to secure this energy storage on the EV supply chains and pay the PLI incentives with the strategic equity via IJF and the GDIC to achieve the scale needed to reduce the import dependence. Next, at the World Youth Skills Day 2026 in Kohima, Nagaland Higher and Technical Education Advisor Tenjan Memba said the government employment alone cannot absorb the growing number of the educated youth, urging skill development and entrepreneurship and the emerging technologies in the artificial intelligence and machine learning. And a Japanese language center, NSC, NSA DM IDEN, was launched to equip the youth for the jobs in the Japan, and the power department separately installed 1,890 smart meters in parent division. With the government jobs limited, the market-driven skills and the overseas employment have become essential for sustainable livelihoods. Smart metering, meanwhile, is central to the power sector reforms and to unlock the rooftop solar. The NSEDM, which is the Nagaland Skill and Entrepreneurship Development Mission under the Investment and the Development Authority of Nagaland, was established in October 2025, and it has trained over 3,500 people with 800 in the ongoing programs and more than 1,000 beneficiaries already securing employment or self-employment. The Japanese Language Center targets overseas placement by building language proficiency. The parent smart meters were installed under the central power sector reforms and the Pradhan Mantri Surya Grah Muft Bijli Yojana. The advisor's message signals a strategic shift from public sector dependence to market relevant skilling and a migration linked livelihoods, with Japan as a key destination for the language proficient youth. Smart meters, on the other hand, enable accurate consumption, recording, and the prepaid and postpaid billing, and are mandatory for availing the rooftop solar installations under the Pradhan Mantri Surya Grah Bijli Muft Bijli Yojana. Awareness drives are addressing the consumer misconceptions and encouraging the judicious electricity use, improving the discoms, billing efficiency, and transparency. Scale now the way forward is to scale the market relevant skilling through the language and the digital skills with the overseas placement pathways and deepen the smart metering and the rooftop solar adoption for reliable clean power and financially viable distribution. Next, let us look at polity, governance, and legislation. So, ahead of the monsoon session starting from 20 July, the NDA and the opposition India bloc are firming up the strategies over the Constitution 131 Amendment Bill, which proposes raising the Lok Sabha seats to 850 and initiating the delimitation process. NDA is trying to muster a two-third majority to pass it. Delimitation, which is the redrawing and reallocation of the constituencies on the latest census, is the legal basis for implementing the women's reservation from 2029 Lok Sabha election. So the bill carries stakes far beyond the seat numbers. The NDA's Lok Sabha strength rose from 298 in April to 329 after 20 Trinamool and 6 Shiv Sena UBT MPs aligned with it, though it remains short of the two-third mark of 362. In Rajya Sabha, its strength is set to reach 117, its highest ever, after three TMC members joined, still short of 164 mark there. The Constitution Amendment bills must clear both houses by special majority. The politics are delicate. Supriya Sule suggested a uniform 50% increase across all states would leave little reason to oppose, signaling that the formula for the reallocation is the crux. Indian National Congress has accused the BJP government of chasing two-thirds through the defection route and predicts another defeat after his humiliation on April 17. The BJP has reopened talks with DMK. The underlying fear among the southern and the high-performing states is that the reallocation on the latest incomplete census will shift the relative weight towards the higher population states, penalizing those that curb the population growth. The way forward is to build the consensus on a formula such as uniform percentage increase that protects the federal balance while enabling the women's reservation, and transparently addressing the center state weightage concerns is essential to a durable settlement. Next, the Election Commission of India told the Joint Parliamentary Committee it is it can be ready to conduct the simultaneous Lok Sabha and Assembly elections within 6 months of notice. The panel chairman is PP Chaudhary. If the Parliament passes the law in the year 2028, it could be implemented from 2029. Separately, Election Commission revised the special intensive revision of the electoral rules for several states, extending it by 10 to 12 days. The One Nation, One Election promises to end near continuous election cycles that the proponents argue disrupt the governance and divert the officials to poll duty. The special intensive revision aims to purify the electoral rules, but both touch the federalism and risk of disenfranchisement. The committee examining the constitutional amendment bills held the discussions with the vice chancellors, directors, and the heads of the departments from the leading universities, covering center state relations and the implications of a midterm election and election commission's powers. On the special intensive revision, the revised schedule covers Karnataka, Delhi, Telangana, and Punjab, part of the Phase 3 revision across the 16 states and union territories. In Nagaland, the qualifying date is October the 1st, and in Zunabadu, 211 booth level officers have completed training. Chowdhury said almost 99% of the civil society and ordinary people are in favor, and that the experts' opinion that the proposal does not violate the Constitution's basic structure, federalism, or democracy, provided a timetable holds the Lok Sabha and Assembly elections together without curtailing the state's powers. On the special intensive revision, Election Commission has so far deleted 7.09% of the names in this phase, and that is 32.08 lakhs of the 4.52 crore, which drives both a rule purification argument and disenfranchisement concern, with opposition parties, example in Telangana, alleging that households missed enumeration and names were wrongly deleted. So, way forward is to weigh the one nation, one election governance and the cost gains against the genuine federal and the logistical concerns, and ensure SIR is transparent, inclusive, and free of wrongful deletions so the role cleaning does not become disenfranchisement. Next, the Joint Committee reviewing the Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishtan Bill 2025 deferred its report finalizing meeting to 20 July after objections from the TDP ruled Andhra Pradesh. The bill restructures higher education regulation by replacing the University Grants Commission, AICTE, and the NCTA with a single apex body, Viksit Bharat Shiksha Adhishtan. Merging three regulators into one apex body is a major centralization of the higher education governance because education is a shared or concurrent domain and it directly raises the questions about the state's legislative competence and the university autonomy. Andhra Pradesh argued the bill could make the state's legislative competence in the higher education a dead letter. It objected specifically to the Clause 11, which allows the regulatory council to bypass the state universities in granting the degrees, as risking the constitutional friction, and sought the mandatory state consultation before decisions affecting the state universities, plus a clause preventing the center from taking any action prejudicial to the state institute's autonomy, functioning, and governance. Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan held an informal meeting with the committee chair, Dagbat Purandreshwari, and others to discuss the concerns. TDP conveyed its reservations, following which it was decided the draft report would be reviewed again. The episode mirrors the earlier friction over the Waqf Bill and the ongoing 130th Constitutional Amendment consultations and captures a recurring tension, a drive for a single streamlined national regulator versus the state's insistence on cooperative federalism and protection of their universities. The way forward is to balance a single national regulator with cooperative federalism through mandatory statewide consultations. Explicit safeguards for the state universities' autonomy is needed for the bills to command the broad acceptance. Next news is the center has announced that India aims for full digital rollout of the criminal justice system from July the 1st, 2027, after which the procedures for the investigations and the trials under the new laws will be recorded digitally through the interoperable criminal justice system with the data stored on the government cloud platform Meghraj. A criminal justice system's efficiency depends on the procedural efficiency from FIR to disposal. Digitizing this chain aims to speed the justice, while the new code reframe the system around the citizen rather than the accused. The Indian Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure have been replaced by Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita and Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, where the old penal code was framed to punish the accused. The new code takes a more democratic approach, treating the accused as a citizen whose rights are balanced against the victims and the societies, strengthening the natural justice principles such as the right of fair hearing, which is odi alteram partem, that no person be condemned unheard. The new laws made the forensic examination of the crime scenes mandatory for offences punishable with 7 or more years of imprisonment. Consequently, forensic laboratories rose from 129 in 2023 to 154 in 2025, but the digital chain is incomplete. According to the NCRB, only 46% of the FIRs are digitally transmitted to the courts, less than half of all registered cases, and the state progress is uneven. The courts continue to fill the legislative gaps where the law is silent, as the Supreme Court did in the Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan on the workplace sexual harassment. So, way forward is completing the FIR to court digital chain uniformly across all the states by 2027 and expanding the forensic capacity to match the 7-year mandate will make the system more efficient and truly citizen oriented. Next, the Supreme Court directed the nationwide circulation of the comprehensive guidelines prepared by National Judicial Academy to make the courts more sensitive and empathetic towards the survivors of the sexual offences. A bench comprising of the Chief Justice of India, Suryakant, and Justices Jayamala Bagchi and V. Mohana ordered the circulation to all the high courts, district courts, and the State Legal Services Authority, the state law departments, and the directorates of prosecution. Insensitive judicial language and reasoning can re traumatize the survivors and they distort the law. Standardized sensitivity guidelines aim to ensure that the women and the children who have endured sexual abuse receive justice with dignity. The directive came in the suo motu proceedings initiated in 2025 after an Allahabad High Court judgment held that grabbing a minor girl's breasts and attempting to untie her salwar drawstring amounted only to preparation for rape and not an attempt, drawing widespread criticism. Supreme Court has set aside the judgment as noticeably erroneous and contrary to the settled principle of the criminal jurisprudence, and restored the charge of attempt to rape under the POXO Act. The court instituted the directorates of the prosecution to ensure the police are sensitized on the registering the FIRs and filing the charge sheets in the sexual offense cases, and had earlier directed the National Judicial Academy to frame the comprehensive guidelines on insensitive language and terminology used in the judicial orders on the sexual abuse. Senior advocate H.S. Pulka for the NGO Just Rights for Children welcome the development. The move squarely addresses a systemic problem, the gap between the letter of the protective laws like POXO and their sensitive application in the courtrooms. The way forward, the guidelines must now be implemented in the letter and the spirit and sensitizing the judges, prosecutors, and the police alike so the reform translates into dignity and justice for survivors rather than remaining on the paper. Next, uh, the editorial, the Hindu editorial argues that New Delhi cannot keep stalling, that is, the center cannot keep stalling the restoration of the statehood of the Jammu and Kashmir over 2.5 years after the Union government's solemn assurance to the Supreme Court. Nothing has been done. The Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Omar Abdullah has organized agitations culminating in a Jantar Mantar sit-in on 20 July this month. So, Union territory status, even after an elected government subordinates that government to an unelected lieutenant governor with preponderant authority over the bureaucracy, police, and institutions, leaving little principled justification for the arrangement once the elections have been held. The center set no timeline for restoration, but the expectation was that it would happen within a reasonable period. Prime Minister Modi pledged it before the JNK elections, and the Home Minister reiterated it in the Parliament. The New Delhi's rationale for inaction has been security, invoked by Solicitor General before the court, citing the Pahalgam attack in a petition seeking restoration of statehood. The editorial rejects that rationale by the government's own account. The attack was orchestrated from across the border and answered by the Operation Sindoor, so a cross-border provocation has no logic bearing on whether JNK's elected representative can be trusted with the full state powers. Empowering the local, empowering the elected leaders, uh, empowering the elected leaders, it argues, uh, is precisely how the political assuage grievances before they turn into the resentment and militancy. It warns the center's handling of the Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, and Manipur reveal a pattern of treating the border regions with substantial minority populations as politically dispensable, which deepens alienation and unsettles the governance. The way forward is the promise made to the court, to the parliament, and to the people of the Jammu and Kashmir must be honored. The statehood must be restored promptly rather than held in abeyance until the political arithmetic, also being reworked through delimitation, turns expedient. Next, let us look at the international relations. Uh, Nearly a month after signing the peace memorandum, US and Iran resumed the strikes across the West Asia, and Iran threatened to halt all the regional oil and gas exports, either for everyone or for no one, over a renewed US naval blockade of the ports of Iran. The Brent crude neared $85 a barrel. President Trump threatened to expand the strikes to Iran's power plants and the bridges following the week unless a deal is reached. The confrontation centers on the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway which is crucial for the global oil and the gas flows. Any closure of the export halts the halt transmits directly into the world energy prices and India's import bill and the trade corridors. Iran blockaded the strait after 28th of February US-Israel strike, briefly reopened it, then vowed to keep it closed until US ends its aggression. US reimposed its own blockade of the Iranian port through Trump-backed back, though Trump backed off the planned 20% levy on the ships using the strait. The Brent is at $85 per barrel, is more than 15% above the pre-war levels, but below the $120 peak of the conflict. The Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem uh, Garibabadi said that renewed US blockade had dismantled the interim peace memorandum. The IMF has warned that International Monetary Fund warned that the oil surplus room that had kept the prices low now has been used up. So unless the inventories are replenished, the world will meet the next shock from a weaker position. Iran has proposed special rates for friendly countries transiting Hormuz and has stuck tankers on the Omani route. the coercive brinksmanship that unsettles the energy-hungry economies, including India. India co-sponsored UN Security Council Resolution 2817, adopted 11th March, condemning the Iran's attacks on the GCC states and the Jordan, but has only modest diplomatic leverage and chose quiet back-channel diplomacy over open involvement. The way forward is India's interest lies in de-risking the Hormuz for the energy and the trade, sustaining quiet diplomacy and restraint, diversifying the energy sources, and joining the collective non-Western pressure to keep the strait open. Next news is an piece about the global nuclear non-proliferation. It says that the present impasse over the Iran's nuclear future lays bare the hypocrisy at the heart of the global non-proliferation order as the talks in Doha stumble over the frozen assets and the verification. Iran is being pressed to fully dismantle its enriched uranium stockpiles for the sanctions relief, even as President Masoud Pezeshkian insists Iran will not relinquish its sovereign right to enrich the uranium. So the demand is unequal, and the five recognized weapon powers and undeclared but nuclear armed Israel face no comparable disarmament ultimatum. So the question is on what grounds Iran alone must give up a capability that the nine nuclear states retain. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of the Nuclear Weapons institutionalized a hierarchy of nuclear haves and have-nots rather than dismantling the arsenals. India and Pakistan, both outside the NPT, hold substantial arsenals yet are welcomed as strategic partners. Israel's program has never been inspected or named in the disclosure. Iran, by contrast, enriched within a legal framework and submitted to the most intrusive inspections under Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and was rewarded with the US unilateral withdrawal in 2008 and reimposed sanctions. The order itself is anchored in only wartime use of the nuclear weapons, that is, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which established both the catastrophic potential of such arms and the precedent that their use could be absorbed into a language of strategic necessity by the very state that now claims to guard the nuclear order. The unraveling of the JCPOA is read as the most instructive episode for any state. It signals that the future arms agreement with the US carries no guarantee of the American compliance. As Einstein and Russell warned in 1955, the weapons must be abolished by all the states or the deterrence will produce the catastrophe it claims to prevent. The way forward is rather than selective enforcing the nuclear non-proliferation, the framework's incoherence must be confronted directly through universal, verifiable, and disarmament if the contradictions at the heart of the nuclear age are not to keep compounding. Next, Russia's latest attempt to jam the Starlink reflect how central the satellite network has become to Ukraine's war effort. It now sits behind the drone operations, the battlefield communications, and the command networks stretching across hundreds of kilometers of the front. Separately, German lawmakers and the anti-Kremlin activists accuse Russia of spreading disinformation via Matryoshka operation to help the far-right AFD before the September's regional elections. Starlink shows uh, Starlink shows how a civilian technology becomes decisive military infrastructure. The German case shows how the information operations target the democratic elections. Both are hallmarks of the modern hybrid conflict with their direct relevance to India. When Russia's 2022 invasion damaged the towers, cut the fiber lines, and hit the satellite network, Ukraine's communications collapsed. SpaceX activated the Starlink within the days, initially for the government offices, hospitals, and the emergency responders. It quickly found military uses because as long as terminal has power and clear sky, it works even when the conventional infrastructure is destroyed. In Germany, the AfD tops the polls in the Saxony, Anhalt, and Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania ahead of the September votes. Ukraine now deploys thousands of the drones a month, and every strike needs a fast exchange of information that is identify the target, relay the video to the command post, verify the coordinates, and direct the follow-up fire. And Starlink connects the commander's drone crews, the frontline units, when other systems fail. also aiding the medical evacuation and infrastructure repair. It is the network behind the weapons and not the weapon itself. In Germany, mocked up fake versions of the outlets, including AFP, fan East-West divisions and smear the mainstream parties. MP Konstantin von Notz says that Russia and the far right share the work with an narrative spread with a budget running into the millions. The lessons are to build resilient sovereign communications. Ukraine is turning to fiber optic drones as backup and to counter foreign information operations without amplifying them. And this challenges every democracy, and India included must prepare for it. Next, let us look at science and technology. A leak of highly sensitive files of the Kudankulam nuclear power plant, reportedly accessed by a ransomware group from a contractor server, has triggered absolute commotion at the plant. After commissioning two 1000 megawatt equivalent VVER reactors, the Kudankulam nuclear power plant is building four more units with the Russian collaboration. Even if no safety system is directly compromised, such a leak poses security threat by potentially letting an adversary map the plant's support systems and identify the vulnerabilities, making critical infrastructure cyber hygiene a national security matter. According to Reuters, more than 19,000 files dating from 2016 to mid 2025 linked to the power plant's engineering blueprints on control, cooling, and ventilation systems and to lists of vendors and suppliers were accessed by a group called World Leaks, and the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited said the claimed data pertains to the conventional balance of the plant common services facility and does not relate to any nuclear safety or nuclear security systems. The leak originated from a server hosted by third-party provider Yota. The plant's contractor Anil Ambani's Reliance Group admitted a partial breach and informed the government. Suspicious activity was noted on 29 May and reported in June end, and NPCIL and the Computer Emergency Response Team are investigating. Notably, the power plant faced a similar incident in 2019 when a North Korean malware infection exposed its administrative network, then dismissed on the claim that its unbreachable standalone network was intact, underscoring that the recurring weak link is the third party and the vendor systems and not the core reactor core. Way forward is to hardening the third party and the vendor cyber supply chains, treating operational technology security and critical infrastructure as national security priority, and mandating independent audits and prompt incident disclosures are essential. Next, let us look at society and social justice. The commentary asks whether India's women reservation bill shortchanges women yet again, because the bill provides 33% reservation of the seats for the women in parliament and the state legislatures. In 2026, the government brought in a special session of the parliament but tied its implementation to the delimitation, the redrawing of the constituencies on the latest, still incomplete census. Linking a long promised reservation to a census and the delimitation process that is itself years away means the critics argue that the women are asked again to wait, while the political weight of the high population states with many women voters is eroded. The bill has long twisting history. It was first examined by a joint parliamentary committee chaired by Geeta Mukherjee in 1996 and has been tabled several times. The piece traces the decades of male resistance in the 1997 quota within a quota demand by the leaders such as Sharad Yadav and jibes about short-haired elite women who would supposedly enter the parliament, even as women's votes have become electorally decisive and no party wants to be seen opposing the reservation outright. The opposition MPs framed the delimitation link sharply. Mahua Moitra called the move delimitation wrapped in a sari, arguing the government is firing the reservation from the shoulders of the women through the legislation that erodes the political power of the states with more women. Shushmita Dev called it a betrayal, and linking reservation to a census and delimitation ties it to a distant, uncertain future. Activist Ranjana Kumari of the Center for Social Research calls the defeat of the bill in its earlier forms a lost opportunity, noting that the gender quotas have delivered change globally when backed by political commitment and clear design. Way forward is to delink the reservation from delimitation, which would make it operational. And the deeper answer is the political will to treat the gender quotas as achievable rather than a distant conditional promises. Next, the Supreme Court pulls up the panel monitoring racism against the Northeast citizens. The Supreme Court questioned whether any concrete work is being done by the court mandated committees set up to address the problem faced by the people from northeastern states living across the country, including the racial discrimination and targeted violence. Justice Sanjay Kumar asked whether these committee meetings were meant only to consume cups of tea, remarking, all talk, nothing seems to be done. A monitoring mechanism that does not track complaints to resolutions fails the very citizens it was meant to protect, leaving everyday racism against Northeasterners effectively unaddressed. The remarks were triggered when the government records referred to a complainant woman who has become untraceable with no means of communication despite having emailed her grievance. The panel was formed to monitor, oversee, and pursue the review implementation of MP West Barua Committee report of July 2014 following the death of Nido Tanya, a 19-year-old student from Arunachal Pradesh who died from injuries after being racially humiliated by a mob in Delhi. The committee comprises senior officials, including some from the Home Ministry and other departments, representatives from the northeastern states, including the petitioner advocate Alana Golme. It empowered to receive and entertain the complaints of racial abuse from the victims and forward them to the national and the state human rights commissions or the jurisdictional police for inquiry and action. The court's sharp observations reflect a wider accountability gap, a mechanism that exists only on paper but does not visibly deliver the outcomes for a vulnerable, dispersed minority. The way forward is to have the monitoring mechanism that must become outcome oriented, tracking each complaint to resolution alongside stronger anti racism enforcement, awareness, and grievance redressal for Northeasterners living across India. Next, at a state level awareness program on prevention of stalking and the cyber stalking in Kohima, National State Commission for Women Chairperson W. Ginyu Konyak warned that every individual carries an open gateway to the entire world right in their pocket, turning private sanctuaries into borderless threats to women and children. The Nagaland State Human Rights Commission Chairman Justice Lansungkum Jamir urged early documentation and reporting break the silence. As the mobile connectivity expands, an invisible borderless threat is reaching directly into the homes. The traditional community safety nets that protected the women in the physical spaces do not work in the digital world. Justice Jamir noted that Section 78 of the Bharati Nyaya Sanhita explicitly recognizes two categories of stalking. One is the physical and cyber. That the first crucial legal step is building a case is clear, documented, and unequivocal no to the stalker. Konyak pointed to a paradox. As per the National Crime Records Bureau, Nagaland has lowest crime rate against the women with 56 cases. Its traditional framework emphasizing community protection, yet the digital spaces are becoming increasingly hazardous. So the analysis is cyber stalking speakers stressed is not an isolated event but an entry point for identity theft, extortion, profound emotional trauma, violating the Information Technology Information Technology Act in Bharati Nyaya Sanhita, demonstrating that the community safety nets fail when the attacks happen in digital realm families do not see. The psychological toll, such as the deep anxiety and the constant fear and the corrosion of the self, requires an unshakable defense. Young women taught to manage digital footprints, lock down the privacy settings, and recognize tracking software. Anonymous, trusted reporting so the students can seek help without fear of exposure and strengthen cyber law enforcement and specialized infrastructure such as state cybercrime police station. The way forward is the response must transform high physical safety into daily digital defense through basic digital hygiene taught across every district, school, and village council, trusted and anonymous reporting, and an end to the victim blaming and specialized cyber policing. Next, let us look at internal security and disaster management. A mob threw stones and vandalized an Assam Rifles camp and torched four vehicles of the security forces in Senapati town in Manipur around 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday after the paramilitary force launched an area domination patrol and search operations on credible intelligence of armed cadres of Makui about 2 kilometers from the designated NSCN IM camp at Auckland. A light vehicle was set ablaze and the two trucks overturned and a civilian car burnt and no casualties were reported. The clash illustrates a fragile, contested space between the counterinsurgency operations and the ceasefire framework where a routine search near a designated camp can rapidly escalate into mob violence and undermine the ongoing peace talks. The defense spokesperson said the intelligence and the social media posts indicate armed cadres moving outside designated camps, carrying the weapons and wearing uniforms in violation of the established ceasefire ground rules, and that the ceasefire monitoring group was formally informed. NSCN-IM, the Isaac Muiwa faction of the Nationalist Social Council of Nagaland, which prefers to call itself the Nationalist Social Council of Nagalim, has been in the ceasefire mode since 1997, with Ukrul as its political heartland. As the tensions escalated, the minimum force was used with the Manipur police and CRPF to disperse the crowd, and the situation was brought under the control. NSCN-IM separately condemned and alleged harassment of the civilians in TM Kasom and nearby villages and alleged the abduction of the four innocent civilians and demanded an independent judicial warrant-based probe into unauthorized raids, warning that such actions undermine the credibility of the peace talks. The flashpoint sits amid the wider Meitei Kukizo strife that has killed more than 260 people and displaced thousands since the year 2023. On 6th of July, gunmen ambushed an Assam Rifles patrol in Ukrul, killing two personnel. The way forward is upholding the ceasefire ground rules on both sides and judicial warrant-based searches and an independent inquiry and a dialogue are needed to prevent escalation and maintain communal harmony. The next news is about the Indo-Naga peace process. A suspected improvised explosive device blast near the Kovanalla Bridge in Chumukidima on 13th of July killed an Assam Rifles Jawan and injured four others. Nagaland DGP Rupin Sharma urged the public to share the information. The working committee of the Naga national political groups condemned it as an unforgivable provocation and a clear indication of the forces against Naga peace. This is coming while the Naga underground groups are under the ceasefire with the government of India and seeking a settlement. The attack threatens to plunge the Naga society back into violence and derail the peace process. Hence, swift and unified civil society condemnation was done. Several bodies sought a swift, impartial probe, including the Angami Youth Organization, called it a pre-planned ambush, the Naga Students Federation, an attempt to reintroduce violence, the Naga Hoho, a heinous act, and the Western Sumi Students Union called it a threat to civilian and the commuters. The working committee for the Naga National Political Groups convener had reaffirmed its commitment to a peaceful resolution, recalling that on 10th of July 2014 it signed the Geneva Calls three deeds of commitment protecting the children in the armed conflict, banning anti-personnel mines, and prohibiting sexual violence. The peace process architecture drew reaffirmations from several actors. The NSCN-IM Chakisang region reiterated support for the framework agreement signed with the Government of India in 2015, holding the Naga national flag, the constitution, and the Naga integration as indispensable. The Eastern Naga National Workers Organization reaffirmed its commitment to an early acceptable Indo-Naga political solution and distanced itself from the frontier Nagaland territorial authority issue. All signatory Naga political groups follow the ceasefire ground rules in letter and the spirit, and the uh, working committee of the Naga national political groups cautioned that those initiating the violence from within or outside Nagaland will face the wrath of the people, and the way forward is insulating the peace process from the violence through swift, impartial investigation, and continued adherence to ceasefire discipline. It is essential to reaching an honorable and acceptable Indo-Naga settlement built on trust and respect. Next, the Konyak Student Union, the apex body of the Konyak Naga community, asked the Konyak Union, the apex body of the Konyak Naga community, asked Nagaland government to proceed with joint oil exploration with the Assam only after long pending the border disputes between the two states are resolved, insisting that the territorial clarity, landowners' consent, and the stronger border security must precede implementation. Separately, Ladakh villagers told a parliamentary panel that they had lost access to traditional grazing grounds following a 2020 India-China border tensions. In both the cases, unresolved boundaries put resource projects and frontier livelihoods at risk. Pastoralists lose the grazing land, and the communities fear that exploration without the settled borders will breed fresh conflict. The Assam-Nagaland border dispute has claimed more than 150 lives since 1960s when Nagaland was carved out of Assam. The Konyak Union's Advisory Board and Executive Council reviewed the 11th June Memorandum of Understanding on the oil exploration signed by both the governments in New Delhi in, uh, in, in Home Minister Amit Shah's presence. On the other hand, along the line of actual control, the People's Liberation Army has, since April 2020, amassed the troops and armaments along the 3,488-kilometer line of actual control. Both sides concluded a series of agreements and the patrolling moratorium after the June 2020 Galwan clash. The Konyak Union said Nagaland should first resolve the disputed areas, particularly in the Tizit and Naginimora belt, and the boundary between Longwa in Mon district and Pongchau, Arunachal Pradesh, Longding district, and ensure the landowners' rights and the consent before any final decision. It also flagged that Google Maps continue to depict parts of Nagaland's border inaccurately and backed the Lotha Naga organization's demand for clarity on the disputed area belt. In Ladakh, nomads of Man Pangong and Leh say they are now barred from the grazing grounds, even from collecting firewood in the erstwhile no-go zones, arguing that a continued local presence bolsters national security. The way forward is resolving the interstate boundaries through clarity and landowner consent before launching resource projects and permitting controlled pastoralist access along the line of actual control, which would strengthen both the frontier security and the local livelihoods. Next, in a first, Home Ministry is set to fence the 90 kilometers of the Sundarbans along India-Bangladesh border in West Bengal, which is a challenging terrain of mangrove forests, tidal swamps, and embankments and creeks. The BSF Director General Praveen Kumar has begun a feasibility and technical study. Separately, the flood situation in Arunachal Pradesh has worsened, with 26 of the 28 districts affected, over 1 lakh people hit, and 7 lives lost and 29 injured. Sundarbans currently has no ground barriers, only floating border outposts secure the riverine border, and the government consider fencing vital for national security. And Arunachal floods highlight the northeast's acute disaster vulnerability. Almost 71 kilometers of the border is contiguous with Sundarban Wildlife Sanctuary, which is a protected area where no construction is allowed. So the plan leans on augmented marine patrolling, searchlights, and surveillance cameras rather than conventional fencing alone. After the August 2024 ouster of Sheikh Hasina government in Bangladesh, the BSF enhanced the patrolling and deployment along the border, though not a preferred infiltration route. The Sundarbans is used for trans-border crimes. The project gathered pace after the changes of the government in West Bengal, and the previous state government had not allowed any joint survey of the land. Locals fear their land may be acquired for the fence, and several mid-scale hotels and lodges operating in the area fear relocation. The BSF has assured them of compensation and rehabilitation. The core tension is between building border security infrastructure and protecting a fragile mangrove ecosystem and local livelihood. The Arunachal floods, meanwhile, underline how thinly resourced disaster preparedness in the region can be overwhelmed. Way forward is balancing the border security with the mangrove ecosystem protection, and livelihood safeguards, and strengthening the Northeast flood preparedness, early warning and response. These are the twin imperatives. Then let us look at history and culture. Uh, as Odisha prepares for the annual Rath Yatra, which begins in Puri on 16th of July, President Draupadi Murmu shared a rare and deeply personal account of her lifelong devotion to Lord Jagannath, describing how her faith has sustained her through personal hardships and continues to guide her in the public life. The president framed the festival around Lord Jagannath's message of equality, which she has always guided her own commitment to serving all sections of society, giving the festival contemporary civic and cultural resonance. The Rath Yatra is the most spectacular of many festivals celebrated in Puri. It is the one occasion when Lord Jagannath, accompanied by Lord Balabhadra, Devi Subhadra, and Sudarshana, leaves the sanctum of the temple to travel in majestic chariots along the Badadanda, which is Grand Avenue, to the Gundicha temple, giving devotees an opportunity to have darshan outside the shrine. Recalled silently praying to the deity while proceeding to Parliament to take her oath of office in 2022. The tradition embodies inclusivity and the deity's public accessibility, a rare instance of divine coming out to the devotee and dissolving the usual separation of the sanctum and the street. From a UPSC and NPSC perspective, the festival is a touchstone for study of India's living participatory heritage, the iconography of the four deities, the ritual journey from temple to temple, and the social message of equality that the popular devotional traditions can carry. The way forward is the Ratha Yatra exemplifies how festivals sustain cultural identity and community, which is a living heritage in which public participatory devotion continues to reinforce an ethic of equality and inclusion. That's it for today, and thank you. We will be meeting again tomorrow.